Support for Fieldwork is provided by Manitou Fund.
Hey everyone, Mitchell Hora here with Fieldwork. We hope that everyone is staying healthy during the coronavirus outbreak. Just a heads up that we recorded this episode when coronavirus wasn't at the top of everyone's list of issues. Our responsibilities as farmers is to provide food, fuel, and fiber to the world, and that role is more important than ever. We hope that you'll still find the information in this episode interesting and entertaining, even if you have a lot of other things on your mind. Stay safe, keep a positive mindset, and thanks for listening to the Fieldwork Podcast.
Is this going to be with the actual millennial farmer or just a stunt double?
Oh, yeah, stunt double.
This is the stunt double.
Zach's actually a fake farmer anyway.
Hey everyone, I'm Zach Johnson.
Hey, I'm Mitchell Hora. You're listening to Fieldwork Podcast, a show where we talk about sustainable agriculture and the challenges and benefits of adopting sustainable practices.
Season 1's episodes were heavily focused on row crop farmers, and so we're excited to start digging a little bit more into livestock now in Season 2.
In fact, we decided it was a good idea to talk about what happens when you combined livestock and row crops. There's a lot of reasons for digging into this. Big one for me is integrating livestock is one of the 5 principles of soil health. And just being able to look at, I think, an additional revenue stream. But what I hear anyway is livestock are a heck of a lot of work.
You know, I've noticed that by watching other people do that work. So today we're actually talking to 2 different people at really different stages of working with livestock on their farms.
First up is going to be a neighbor of mine. He's another millennial farmer from Washington County, Iowa. Michael Vittetoe is his name. He purchased a couple head of cattle to roam on his row crop farm here just recently, a couple years ago. And some of the changes that he's seen on his farm have been really, really interesting.
So there's another millennial farmer out there?
Another millennial farmer.
Interesting.
Well, I mean, I think according to our script, he is another... he's a millennial farmer.
A millennial farmer.
Darn millennials.
Darn millennials. There's a lot of good things to discuss here, so we talked to him on Skype. Let's get to it. All right, Mitchell, so you know Michael. Why don't you and Michael... Well, Mitchell's busy on social media. He's
I'm literally Snapchatting him.
Well, yeah, he just sent me a Snapchat, so I know how busy he is.
Yeah, right.
Michael, is it sunny and 75 in Washington County here today?
Every day of the year.
See, I told you. I've been telling Zach the whole time. Down in Washington County, it's sunny and 75 every day.
I assumed that.
Now it's confirmed.
Now it's confirmed, yes.
So Michael and I, our farms are literally, I think, 7 miles apart. Real close together. But, Michael, tell us about your family's operation there. Give us a little background for us.
Background on the family's operation. At the current time, I farm with my dad and my grandpa. He's been around forever, but he's getting up there, so he's essentially retired other than when he wants to come out and hang out on the farm. But we've got about 1,400 acres of row crop ground, corn and soybeans, and then we've also got about 4,500 spaces of hog finishing confinement building that we own and maintain and do all the chores in and everything, as well as a couple nursery buildings that we own, but we don't do the chores in those. So that's been going on forever. Dad and Grandpa, they started no-tilling back in the 80s. So there's been a long history of, soil health and conservation and everything like that on the operation. And then it was probably seven or 8 years ago now when they started trying cover crops on the operation, just, like a 40-acre field here and there, getting a feel for that. And in the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've started ramping that up, and we're over 50%, probably around 60% of our acres have cover crop on them now.
So you haven't always been doing beef production. This is something that's actually relatively new to you.
Yeah. So before I started the beef herd, the cattle herd, between my dad and I, we had exactly 0 years of experience with cattle.
Wow.
Nice.
And exactly 0 feet of fence.
0 feet of fence. Literally tore out all the fence. Walk us back through the initial pieces here. We know integrating livestock is one of the pillars of soil health, but how did that kind of transition actually come about?
Yeah, so I guess I've kind of been on my soil health journey, if that's what you want to call it, since end of 2015, early 2016, is when I started learning about soil health and everything that it involves. And right from the get-go, you hear everybody that's an expert on it that's further down the road than what I was at that point. Everybody was talking about the livestock integration part, and being a row crop guy that we've got confinement hogs and everything, like the idea of getting livestock back out on the land was, it's taboo. You just kind of brush it off like, oh, that'll never happen. We're not going to do that. And so that's essentially how I was for quite a while. But so I was essentially just looking at the other principles of soil health and trying to figure out how to make that stuff work. And we've done some stuff on the farm with interseeding cover crops into corn and whatnot, and the more experience I got with that, the more I started to realize that, hey, there's a real opportunity here for a grazing component to be added into this. And it was becoming more apparent that that was going to be essential to making some of that stuff work, because just growing these cover crops purely for soil health and trying to increase yields on the row crop side of things, I was having a hard time seeing how that was going to work out. So that's when I started to kind of think about starting a cattle herd and whatnot, but I was still dragging my feet because I know how much work it's going to be and how much money it's going to cost, and how long of a process that is before it turns into
Time and money,
something.
Zach.
Time.
Yeah.
I didn't
Gosh,
realize
dang
that
it.
livestock took time and money.
No, yeah.
Right. Yeah, me neither, right? No, so I was still dragging my feet on it and whatnot, but in the back of my mind, I knew it was something that needed to happen. We had the Soil Health Academy came to Steve Berger's farm in Wellman, which is in the county, in Washington County. It was one of the first soil health academies that they had. And I had a chance to sit down and talk with Gabe Brown quite a bit at that, in between sessions and everything, and was picking his brain, and it just kind of got to the point where I was at a boiling point where I knew I needed to make something happen. And so that was in February, and I kind of decided that next summer I was going to start the cattle herd and whatnot. So I started doing my research on it, looking into breeds and everything else, and looking for animals to buy and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah. And
yeah.
a little like tidbit on Soil Health Academy and Gabe Brown and stuff like, so that's Gabe Brown, Ray Archuleta. Who else did we have there? So I was at this event as well with Michael. Those guys are like the big kind of big names into it. So cool to be able to like directly sit there and pick their brains. But
Michael, I maybe missed
Yeah.
it here, but did you say when you actually got into the livestock? What year was that? So how much time do you have into this, and how many head are you running right now?
It was the spring of 2018. So I'm two growing seasons in.
so he's an expert by now.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it all figured out.
And how many head are you running out there?
So right now I've got 17 head total, including all of my cows. So I essentially have 8 cows, 8 calves, and a bull. So
And how
yeah.
many have you like already harvested?
I bought 3 steers the 3 steers were my very first animals that I bought, and they were about 5 weights when I got them, and they finished out this past summer in 2019. So they went in and got butchered. One of them was in August, and 2 of them were in October. And so they're all done. They're through the lockers and in customers' freezers and everything. So right now everything's just being direct marketed.
Can you talk about some of the benefits you've seen to this point?
What we are trying to do with our farm operation is mimic the natural ecosystem and nature as close as possible. And in the natural ecosystem, there have always been livestock on the ground in the fields and everything before they were fields and before there was agriculture. And that consisted of, whatever the native species were for any specific reason. And with the modern farming methods, we have gotten livestock away from the land and into confinements, and there has been some unforeseen uh, side effects of that. And so we're trying to get the animals back on the land, and the main thing that this is benefiting is from a biological perspective, where the animals, whether they're just taking a bite of grass, some of their saliva gets onto the soil in a roundabout way that would not happen if they were in a feedlot. And the same thing out the other end of the animal.
At the back
We're
end.
getting, yes, we're getting biology back into the land in a more direct manner, and instead of having that biology go into a manure pile and do some transformations and then haul it back out, and it's going to be not quite the same. So that's the biggest benefit. And then there's also some benefits from just the well-being of the animals themselves. If they're out on the land breathing fresh air and grazing clean forage and fresh forage every day, and moving on, and it's good for the animals themselves to be able to do that. That's one of the main things that we enjoy about having the animals back on the land.
So you're completing the natural cycle by using, some of your own nutrients, your own crops, your own grasses, to basically to feed the animal, to use the animal to break down the nutrients, which go back into the field, and it really is just completing the cycle of the nutrient usage.
Exactly. It kind of satisfies my desires to go out and walk around, and makes it so it's not like I'm just going out and walking around wasting time. I'm actually getting something done. So
You're able to justify going out and walking around outside and be out on
that's
the land.
right.
That's the main thing when you have cattle. It's just a way to justify being outside.
Yeah. Gotta go check the cows. We gotta get the kids ready for school. I don't know. I gotta go check the cows.
Sorry, I gotta go. I gotta go walk the cows.
Hey, we need to do this laundry. I don't know. I gotta go move the cows. All right. So really great discussion here on Skype. We're gonna keep the conversation rolling. So definitely seeing now a little bit of the potential to be more profitable per acre.
It's a way to take revenue per acre way higher than what we can get through row crops. If you look at the margins on direct marketing grass-fed beef, if you look at what you can get for an animal, now granted your input costs are going to be higher than just seed and equipment and whatnot, because you're having to buy calves and everything, but it takes the revenue per acre up. And then I've also seen some opportunities to have other species of livestock on that same acre grazing the plants that are already there that the cattle don't necessarily want to eat. So I see even more opportunity there to take advantage of what we've got going on to create even more additional revenue on that same acre. You open up that grazing operation, and then it opens the door to, you can stack a whole bunch of enterprises on the same acre a lot easier than what you could do with a row crop type operation.
But how many acres are you devoting to these 18 calves? And what about some of the other grazing stuff you're kind of talking about there, like other animals that you're also able to now integrate?
Right. So right now it's still very small in relation to the scope of our entire operation. I've got roughly at the current time I've got 8 acres that I was grazing throughout the growing season in 2019. But like I said, I didn't have any fence when I started this thing, so I've been slowly investing in fence and adding to it. So eventually I'll be close to 80 acres here, and I hope to have 80 acres with fence on it in by the end of 2020. So yeah, the fencing part is my biggest hurdle at this point, because we live right on a state highway, and I need to have good perimeter fence to keep them off the road.
No cows on the
So
highway. That'd be
no,
bad.
I don't like
They
having
frown on
cows
that.
the
Yeah, they
highway.
frown on that.
Yeah, it doesn't go over well when that happens.
Are these also crop production acres?
For the most part, these are acres that have been row cropped, but they're small, like the 5-acre patch. It's a weird triangle shaped patch with my house building site out of it and 2 power poles in it. So it was a pain in the butt to farm row crop anyways. So we're pulling that out of row crop production, at least for now, to be pasture. And I don't think that one will ever go back in. But the other stuff that I'm looking at doing, I'm just building perimeter fence on it. And then like the next 25-acre patch, it's got about a 10-acre patch of row crop ground in it that won't be row crop next year, but I'm just planning on, for the time being, seeding annual forage crops on that row crop ground within that patch of 25 acres. And then that way, if in the future I want to bring that back to row crop, or I'm not planning on going in and seeding perennials right away, because what I would like to do eventually is turn the grass-fed beef into essentially a part of the rotation, where go around and once every 4 or 5 years you take a full growing season and grow an annual cover crop or forage mix or whatever you want to call it on those acres, and then that would just be a part of the rotation, and you rotate that around to get the soil health benefits spread out across the entire farm.
And how do you have that penciled out in terms of like making this actually work profitably?
Right. So obviously the land cost, that's the big thing here, because I'm not working with land that is getting rented for $50 an acre or anything like that. This is good row crop soil and whatnot. So that's the hardest part to pay, is the land rent side of things. Even if you own it, you still need to charge yourself something similar to what you would be getting for row crop type land rent. So that's the biggest difference, is I'm working with some higher quality land, and that's where I've kind of decided I'm not going to expand my cow herd any more than what I've already got, and I'm going to focus on the grass-fed and grass finishing side of things, where I can turn that revenue around a lot faster and actually get the premiums for it. So I kind of danced around your question there, but I really don't have a good answer for you on that. I don't think it would really work all that well, because conventional cattle markets are kind of a tough thing regardless right now, from what
Well,
I
especially
understand.
at your scale too, with only a couple of calves, like
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
you don't have the economy of scale to play in and,
Yep.
and factor.
Yep.
Yeah, and
So
especially at that where you've got a manageable, it's a small enough herd here where
Mhm.
this is manageable, where you can do something like the grass fed, the way it sounds like it works out for
Yep.
you really
Yep.
well. I mean, why not go after that market?
Yes, exactly. And that's something that I'm trying to figure out right now, is because I want to scale it up, and the plan is to keep scaling it up, but I'm trying to figure out, okay, what rate of growth should I actually go for? I did 3 animals this last year. Should I try and do 10 next year, or is that too much? Because I don't want to get left holding the bag on a couple animals if I can't get them sold.
Mhm.
So trying to get a feel for that, and how everything's going to work out is something that I've been trying to figure out here
And how
recently.
have you been able to market those animals? So
So
starting out, like for a lot of our listeners here, that don't have livestock that are hearing this and like, okay, I mean, yeah, there was some investment, yeah, there was some additional time and a little bit
Yep.
of upfront cost, but I don't know where I would sell these things. How did you navigate that?
Right. So I've just tried, and I haven't been doing it as good lately, but I've tried to keep my social media page updated as far as talking about what I'm doing with the animals and
Zach doesn't believe you.
you know,
Social media doesn't work.
right. Yeah.
No,
Zach's
there's
not
nothing
a
to it.
social
No.
media
It's a
guy.
fad.
It's a fad.
So,
It's a fad.
so
People
I've
aren't
been
on social
I've been
media.
trying to do that, just keep people up to date on things, and just by doing that, I had people reach out to me with interest in buying beef from my animals, you know. And so that's how everything's been sold so far. So that's kind of the game plan moving forward, is just to leverage the social media to market these animals. You know, that's what I'm struggling with, to figure out, okay, how scalable is this? Because so far everybody's been, you know, a personal friend of mine that's bought it. But at some point here, I'm gonna have to start selling outside of my, you know, my own personal network.
Yeah,
So
you're going to have to find a larger market to pull from.
Mhm.
exactly.
How close are
exactly.
you to to a larger population?
Right. So we're about 30 minutes south of Iowa City, which Iowa City isn't really huge, but it's a pretty liberal area. That's where the University of Iowa's at. I've got a lot of friends in that area, friends and family in that area, and about half of what I sold this last year went to that market, people in the Iowa City area. So that's kind of where I'm looking to move a lot of my product to, is the Iowa City area. I don't know what the whole metro is for Iowa City, maybe getting close to
Like
100,000.
100,000, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a pretty
So
solid
No, it's pretty
population.
solid.
yeah, it's
You
not
could
bad.
sell a couple
and,
calves there.
Yeah.
and it's a white collar area, you know, so this type of product is going to be better received in an area like that than a, you know, a
Yeah,
blue
lower
collar
income, sure.
working class area. Not that there's anything wrong with that, you know, that's how I am, but yeah, that's the target market for what I'm producing this product for.
So I know from our personal connection that you've got some other livestock that you've integrated as well. Tell us about those.
You talking about my chickens?
Yeah.
So I'm a big time chicken farmer
Big
too.
time.
I've got
I can tell
13
you're a
Yeah,
massive
yeah,
chicken
we knew
farmer
that.
because Mitchell was laughing when he asked, and you
Yeah, yeah.
responded with laughter.
Yeah.
So this, like,
Yeah.
let's hear the
Big
serious
time chicken.
details on this
Big time chicken
business investment.
Yep. Yeah, so I've got 13 laying hens. So they just kind of go wherever they want to go. They live in the barnyard with the cows. So they essentially just follow the cows around to wherever they're at and go scratch through their cow pies and everything else. And
How do you,
uh,
at that type
yeah.
of scale, how do you manage the volume of eggs?
Well, it can be difficult, you know. Sometimes
He's got little
sometimes
kids. They can go run around and find them. It's like an Easter egg hunt every day.
Every single day.
Yeah.
Yep.
The
Sometimes
chocolate
I
is
forget-
terrible, by the way.
Chocolate.
I forget to take my egg basket sometimes, so you know I got to take my stocking cap off and put the eggs in that, and then my head gets cold, and there's all
hilarious.
kinds of logistical issues.
Go back to, what are your advice for other farmers that are hearing this and like, I don't know, they were in the same boat that you were, like, I don't know about this. I don't know. I know that integrated livestock is one of the components of soil health, but I don't have time. I don't have fence. I don't have water. What do you tell them?
Well, I guess my advice for someone that is interested in it but is dragging their feet a little bit is, you know, at some point push has to come to shove, and you need to make a decision whether you're going to do it or not. And if you think it's something that you want to do, then you just need to make it happen, I guess. You know, you can spend as much time with cattle or as little time with cattle as you want. It all depends on what type of time availability you have. You know, you don't have to start with 100 head. You don't have to start with even 15 head. You know, you can start with just a couple and figure it out.
Zach's
You know,
gonna go buy
I
some cows and some chickens right
yep.
now.
I'm going to start with chickens.
He's already on his
Chickens
way.
first.
All right, Michael, farmer from Washington, because there is an
Washington.
R
Yeah,
in,
no,
in
there's an R.
Washington.
Yeah, Washington.
Washington County, Iowa, just down the road from Mitchell.
Yep.
We appreciate you coming on here today. Interesting talk right there coming from somebody who really just dove right in and went for it and is just getting his feet wet
Figuring it out.
Yeah, figuring it out. As with
Yep.
anything in life, sometimes, you know, you just got to
Go for it.
You got to go for it. Yep.
I like to call it Mount Stupid. Are you guys familiar with Mount Stupid?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, isn't it sitting across from me? Oh, serious burn.
Yikes.
All right. Michael Vittetoe joining us today on the Fieldwork Podcast via Skype. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Michael. It's been a fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys. Have a good one.
That was Michael Vittetoe, one of Mitchell's neighbors and a row crop / livestock farmer. We talked to him on Skype.
After the break, we're going to hear from Dave Scott, a farmer who's had livestock for a lot longer than Michael has, and but he's trying out some really super exciting stuff on his farm.
Welcome back to Fieldwork. I'm Zach Johnson. And in this next part of the show, we're going to hear my interview with Dave Scott. He's a livestock specialist at NCAT, which is the National Center for Appropriate Technology in Butte, Montana. Dave's also a former dairy farmer who now grazes a couple hundred ewes, which he markets direct to consumers. Unlike Michael Vittetoe, who's just starting out with integrating grazing into his row crop operation, Dave's actually an animal guy who's reached kind of a pro level with his grazing management practices now. And he's seeing a big return. He's saving a ton of money and time with reduced irrigation and fertilizer use. Dave started out by telling me more about NCAT and what he does there before diving into the specifics of his farm.
NCAT's kind of like a private nonprofit extension service. And we have 6 regional offices throughout the United States, and in each one of those offices there's 3 to 6 agricultural specialists. My duties include writing publications, doing videos, doing podcasts on all things livestock. Since I am a sheep person with a dairy background, I concentrate a lot on sheep and goats and a little bit on the dairy. Besides writing these publications, we operate a hotline for farmers Monday through Friday, and anybody can call us up and with a question about that they might have on their farm or just bounce some ideas off the wall with us, and we provide that service. So that's basically what I do.
How big of an area does that encompass? Or maybe there isn't an area. Can anybody call into that hotline and look for your services?
It's nationwide, yes.
It is nationwide. Okay.
Yes. Yes, and I should say, too, Zach, that we concentrate a lot on the, you might say, sustainable or regenerative type parts of agriculture.
Sure.
Generally, we deal with the expense side of the equation and try to hold the production and yield side of the equation the same. But we're all for lowering inputs, and that can be anything from less fertilizer to less irrigation expenses, less labor expenses. So we're on that expense side of the equation a lot.
Can you tell me about some of the success stories or maybe some of the stories that just happen to be your favorite over the years of working with people?
Well, I guess I've got a personal one I could start out with. We started milking cows on our farm in Whitehall, which is 32 acres of irrigated pasture in 1982. In 2003, we sold the milk cows and bought about 200 ewes. We always fertilized with about 150 to 160 units of N to grow about 6 tons of dry matter of pasture. And we have almost all grass pasture. That's something we're working on to try to get legumes in it. But it's basically 95% grass. And so grass needs nitrogen. And about 2013, I heard Gabe Brown and Dr. Christine Jones speak at a conference, and they really opened my eyes to not really having to use fertilizer if you can get your soil to function for you. So we went on a transition program right then. Took us 4 years to transition off of that 160 units per acre. But we've been on, off that transition for the last 3 grazing seasons, and we've fertilized 0 units of N, and we've actually increased our grass production to almost 7 tons to the acre, up from 6. So that's a personal success story. It hasn't been without its challenges, but it's sure nice not to have to pay, $125 to $150 in the bad years per acre of fertilizer.
How have you gone about doing that? How did this happen over that 4-year transition? How did you achieve this?
We basically followed Christine Jones's recipe that she laid out at the conference. It was the Quivira conference in New Mexico in 2013, and she basically said to half of it, take half of your fertilizer the first year on your transition, then half it again, and then you're at 0. What we did is we went from 160 units to 75 units. The first year of transition, I got kind of cold feet. The second year, so I kept it at 75 units. And then the third year, we went to 32. And then the fourth year, we were at 0. And, of course, we were monitoring all the time using the Haney test, kind of tracking our mineralizable nitrogen according to the Haney test, and it was giving us confidence that we had enough N out there to do the job to get our yield.
So just by cutting the nitrogen out of it slowly, I mean, what was the management practice that changed that still allowed for the production to be there without the nutrients or without the nitrogen specifically?
Yeah, we changed our grazing from short grass grazing, which is we grazed 18 to 20-inch grass. We changed that by lengthening our rest period from 30 days to 42 days. And so we went from short grass to tall grass grazing. And what that did was it gave the grass plants enough time to photosynthesize and to emit root exudates in the soil to the soil microbes. And that really made a big difference, because once they could emit the sugars and feed the microbes, the microbes brought the N back to the plants. It's kind of like a deal. The plants aren't going to give the sugars to the microbes through the roots unless the microbes give the nitrogen first.
So you're just allowing a little bit more time for that natural cycle to take place.
Right. Yeah, and then coupled with that, Zach, when we had tall grass, all of a sudden with high stock density grazing, we were able to eat half and trample half of that grass. So there was, if we went into a paddock that had 5,000 pounds of dry matter per acre, we had enough stocking density. We had about 600 ewes and lambs on that acre for one day, and what they didn't eat, they trampled. And so that pressed that grass down right close to the soil surface, and the microbes were able to get at it, and that's another source of carbon that they could use. And so they proliferated because we gave them more carbon than we ever had before.
And so before we get into the return on changing this management practice here, I'm curious, how is the production that you're taking off of there? I mean, the production of grass that you require, I assume, is still the same as it was before when you were using nitrogen. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So you require the same amount of tons of grass in order to achieve the same goals with the ewes. So
right.
Are you getting that same production now without any use of any nitrogen?
Yes, we are. And what has happened, Zach, is when we went to a tall grazing system, that increased our grazing wedge at any given time during the grazing season. And the grazing wedge is that amount of grass that is available to the sheep. And so when we quit grazing our summer season in around Labor Day, we end up with a lot more grass with the tall grazing system, about 2.5 times more than we did with the short grass grazing system, because we just have taller grass all year, all summer long, right? So
are you able to raise more animals or more pounds of of animal on the same amount of acres?
We did drop a little bit in our average daily gain for the lambs. It went from about 0.65 pounds per day to about 0.62, which for us is about $1,500 at $1.80 a pound with 280 lambs. So that was a little bit of a discouragement, but actually what we were saving was close to $300 an acre. We saved about $125 an acre in average year on fertilizer, about another $100 an acre on 25% less irrigation that we had to apply because we covered that ground now. It's just flat covered with a roof on it of trampled grass, which kept the moisture in the soil. And then the other one was about 2.3 times this amount of winter grazing that we have with those ewes. So our ewe days has actually increased in the fall by 2.3 times. So if you add all those savings up, it's about $300 an acre.
Wow, that is quite really an impressive difference there to be able to pull your nitrogen practice out of that and still be able to come up with the end result really and save that kind of money. That's a huge change. Have you seen this practice work for other people? Are there other people that you've worked with that have seen the same results?
I have come in contact with different sheep producers and cattle producers in Montana that are grazing similarly, and they are using less nitrogen also.
They are.
Yeah.
And so the sheep also are an integral part of this as far as the nitrogen that's required on that land, I would assume, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That's
yeah.
where a lot of that nitrogen is now coming from, is by having those ewes out there on those acres.
Right. Actually, when a cow or a ewe or any herbivore, when they eat grass, 70 to 80% of what they eat goes out the back end, in terms of nutrients and minerals, including nitrogen. And so, that's the way nature has designed it. So that's actually all we're doing is we're recycling those nutrients through the sheep and then back into the soil, and we're feeding microbes that way.
Sure. I mean, you're completing the nutrient cycle that we talk about a lot on this show.
Right. Yeah, the nutrient cycle is what we are keying on. We're using the sheep, and when a herbivore eats any grass, 80% of what it eats in terms of the nutrients and minerals goes right out the back end. And so nature has designed that system so that, what goes out the back end feeds the microbes in the soil. And that is what cycling nutrients is all about.
And it's already, it's an efficient cycle because the animal has already processed a lot of those nutrients into an available nutrient for those plants to be able to uptake a lot easier.
Exactly. And the other thing it's doing is those rumen microbes that are in the rumen of the herbivore are oftentimes the same microbes, for farmer speak anyway, that's in the soil. And so that ewe or cow, in addition to just, pooping out, plant available and bacteria and fungi available nutrients, they're also pooping out more fungi, bacteria, nematodes, and protozoa that can take hold right in the soil ecosystem right then and there. So it's like an inoculation in addition to a supply of nutrients.
So with the kind of success that you're seeing out there, have you brought that back to a lot of the farmers that you work with through NCAT and just seeing other people try to take on practices like this? What does that look like when it comes back, not from just your personal farm, but back to what you do with being the livestock specialist over there?
Yeah, this last summer we had a regenerative grazing workshop at our farm, and there was 50 people that came to it, and there was a lot of excitement, especially when I could tell them that we are generating through savings or just more grass produced on winter stockpile. We're generating $300 an acre. And so I could see the wheels turn. This is just 30 acres. What if you had 100 irrigated acres and you could do the same thing on 100 irrigated acres? That's $30,000. That's a good way to producing a farm family income. And so people were pretty excited about that.
I would imagine so. I mean, when you're talking that kind of money, $300 an acre, it doesn't matter, how many acres you do or don't have. That's not an insignificant amount of money for any farmer out there. So I would imagine that gets people's attention a lot.
Yeah, Zach, I wish I knew about this about 30, 40 years ago. I could have bought 2 or 3 pickups by now.
There you go. Because that's what farmers do with extra money. We buy pickups, right?
Yeah, right.
Is there anything else that you'd like to throw in, whether it be on your farm or with what you do at NCAT or anything like that? Any other words or stories you want to get in there?
Well, I think if somebody's considering this at all, I think the biggest thing in terms of challenges is, for me anyway, was number one was myself. Getting my mind hooked over to the idea that this just might work, and then trying it. That's the first step, is just trying. And then the second thing is, like Ray Archuleta always says, you have to have integrity. Stick with the program. Stick with it 5 or 6 years. And then you're not out too much if you do it on a small part of your place, and just see what happens. You probably will come up with problems, but using the big thing that we learned was use biological fixes to solve a problem instead of chemicals.
Sure.
And that really has helped. And, I would never, ever go back to our old system of grazing. Not only are we saving money, we have more time for ourselves now. Instead of constantly inputting fertilizer and constantly moving pipes and getting irrigation going all the time, we've got a couple, 3 days out of a week where if we want to go camping, we go camping, and the system takes care of itself.
So there's actually less labor involved with this system for you as well.
Yeah, there's about 25% less labor on irrigation.
Wow.
Well, as an example, we used to irrigate under our old shortgrass system. We irrigated every day of the week.
Wow.
And under this new system, we go every 10 days on a 10-day cycle. So, instead of a 7-day cycle, we're now at 10 days, and we're getting the same amount of grass.
Well, that's definitely an interesting story there, so thank you for sharing that with us. Dave Scott, livestock specialist at NCAT out in Montana, also a 200-head sheep farmer himself with some really interesting stuff to talk about there. I thank you for coming on with us and sharing that with us today, Dave.
Well, Zach, it's been my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on.
Well, Zach, it's now time on the podcast where we get to hear from our listeners. We love getting their comments and questions on our voicemail.
Yeah, if you're a listener out there who would like to call in, you can call and leave us a voicemail at 651-228-4810, 651-228-4810, and maybe we can include you on a future show. Let's hear what we have for a comment today.
Hey, my name's Miriam Hoffman, and I'm a college student majoring in ag business economics. I have a background in sustainable ag on my family farm, and I'm very interested in that as a career aspiration. And my question for y'all is, how do we kind of open up the narrative in agriculture, particularly in youth and student organizations like 4-H and FFA and in our college ag programs, things like that? How do we open up that narrative to talk about sustainability and regenerative practices in a practical way, in a way that doesn't incite kind of defensiveness? Because that's something I've seen a lot of times is we start to talk about sustainability and then we kind of get defensive on the mainstream side. So I'd be really, really curious to hear y'all's insight on how we can kind of move the needle in a positive direction in those areas. Big fan of the podcast. I'm looking forward to season 2. Thank y'all so much.
Well, Miriam, thanks a lot for calling in and really good insight there, I think, too, on how do we get young people involved in this, especially from like the FFA, 4-H side of things.
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be honest, I think it's happening. I really do. I think there's a lot of young farmers out there involved in these organizations, young farmers involved in agriculture that are talking about this. And I think it's not a taboo subject, and you don't have to be defensive about it. I mean, we need to have the conversation. So I think that is starting to happen, but that is a good question.
Yeah, well, and I think as young people, like because of social media and stuff, we're just a little bit more honed in on maybe what the consumer is talking about and what non-farmer audiences are talking about in terms of sustainable agriculture. But I think we can also see what's coming a little bit more as well on what the social pressures are going to be in the future, and we can start implementing that through FFA and 4-H. And I know when I was in high school and in FFA, we were really fortunate that our FFA had a really big land lab. We had like 125 acres that we were farming, like my senior year of FFA. And we were utilizing that ground there to kind of try some things out. And I know they've done some things there with even scouting and soil testing and managing better for fertility, managing insects and pests better, looking at things like, reducing tillage and diversifying the cropping rotations and stuff like that. So I think that is a really cool spot, to get the young people involved, trying things out on those farms where you don't have risk as well.
Right. Yeah, the worst thing that can happen there is you learn from your mistakes. So you can always chalk it up to that. So thanks a ton for the voicemail, Miriam. Again, if anybody else out there wants to leave a comment or a question on our voicemail, you can leave that at 651-228-4810. That's 651-228-4810. That's it for our show today.
You can always find us online at Fieldwork Talk. We're on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
Did anybody out there learn anything useful on this podcast?
Oh, yeah.
Of course you did. So
many
share
notes.
it with your friends. Tell them to follow your great example by subscribing to Fieldwork wherever they get their podcasts, and see who can leave a better review. I think it should be a competition.
Well, and we can be their friends too, so let us know what you learned as well. Hit us up online. And you can find Zach at Minnesota Millennial Farmer. I'm at Continual Mag.
This show today was made possible with the help of Annie Baxter, Amy Scotchless Cole, Claire Jones, Noah Boston, Eric Romani, Kristen Schmidt, and Lauren Humpert.
Our theme music is written and performed by Johnny Vince Evans with help from Corey Streppel. Stay tuned for more episodes of the Fieldwork Podcast. Over and out.
You stay classy, farmers.